Okay, so just a few disclaimers before we start, to remind you that this is not a private conversation, and will ultimately be made available to the public. Um, we want it to be as enjoyable of an experience as it can be. So if at any point we get into a topic of conversation that you're uncomfortable with or don't want to speak about, we'll just redirect. If you need to take a break, just let me know that as well. My role in our conversation is actually to talk as little as possible and to let you tell your story. Um, but rest assured that I'm completely plugged in and engaged with what you're saying. And so today is Thursday, February 23rd, 2017. My name is Andy Reisinger, and I'm interviewing Phil Vaile here in the Department of Special Collections and Archives at Georgia State University as part of the Great Speckled Bird Oral History Project. And before I ask the first question, if I can just get your verbal confirmation and consent to be recorded.
Yes, certainly.
So let's start at the very beginning. If you can describe when and where you were born.
Well, I was born in 1942 in Chicago. I was the oldest of three children. My father was a heating and air conditioning engineer who he did not serve in World War II because he had polio. He had a pretty severely damaged leg. He could still walk on it, but with a limp. And my mother was a elementary school teacher from Iowa, and they married in Iowa. And my father went to college in Chicago, and he was transferred to Louisville, Kentucky. They opened a new office to build the heating and air conditioning plant for General Electric Appliance Park, which was the largest plant in the world at the time. I guess it's still pretty large. And one of the people that he worked with in designing the plant was a friend of his, Art Russell, who he was he installed for IBM the computer at the plant, and eventually Art and his family bought some land from my father, and they moved in next door. And we're good friends for years and years. But that was in Louisville, Kentucky, where my parents moved along with me and my younger brother and sister. So we grew up in Louisville, and actually in Pee Wee Valley, Kentucky is the name of it, which was the setting for the Little Colonel series, which were books and the Shirley Temple movie, and it was a sort of idyllic pastoral suburb of Louisville. And it was on the train line, so the trains ran between Pee Wee Valley and Louisville. It was a sort of idyllic place to grow up, and I enjoyed it. But we went to, all of us went to the Catholic grade school in St. Aloysius in Pee Wee Valley. And I went to Catholic high school in Louisville and graduated in 1960. From there, I went to Georgetown University for a year and studied languages and linguistics, but I didn't care much for DC, so I came back to Louisville and enrolled in the University of Louisville. and worked on a bachelor in economics, and I minored in photography, which eventually I got pretty seriously interested in, and had a few shows in Louisville, and did freelance work for the local papers and the New York Times. But that came a little bit later. I went to work for the Ford Motor Company in Louisville and worked for 5 years, and while I was going to school part-time at U of L. I was basically an inventory control analyst for the plant, and I left that in 1970 and got more serious about photography, which eventually is what brought me to Louisville with my wife. She worked for the Louisville Free Press, another underground newspaper, which is where we met. And when that paper folded, she wanted to come to Atlanta and work for the Great Speckled Bird, and I said, well, okay. And that's how we wound up here. So she went on staff, and I contributed photographs, and that's when our son Chris was born, and later our daughter Jessica. So she struggled with the bird pretty much until it folded, and after that she went to nursing school. She went here to Georgia State, and I eventually wound up also got my master's degree here in statistics. And so the reason we came was it was the height of Richard Nixon's crazy Vietnam War, and it just, I mean, that was my primary involvement with the underground press, was opposition to the war. My father, when we lived in Wisconsin briefly, and he was a serious fan of Joe McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, from the beginning, he was all in favor of the war, and I was opposed to it, and things just got more and more intense as things went on. But that was my primary political involvement. But as we worked for the Great Speckled Bird, I, became more interested in other minority struggles and women's issues and things like that. So that's how I became exposed to the broader struggle of our times.
Mm-hmm. What was your exact date of birth in 1942?
October 27th.
Okay. And were both of your parents from Iowa?
No, my mother was from Iowa. My father was from Dixon, Illinois. He was in the same grade school and high school classes as Ronald Reagan. Must have been something in the water at the time.
And how did your folks meet?
My father was staying in a boarding house that was run by a friend of my mother in Davenport, Illinois, and that's where he started drafting school, and that's where they met.
And did your father spend his entire career
Yes.
with GE?
Well, no, it was Honeywell. He worked for Honeywell.
Okay.
They did the heating and air conditioning for the plant.
And your mother was a school teacher?
Yes, she taught before they were married, but after they were married, she stayed at home full time. But she did fill-in work at the parochial school
Okay.
that I went to school and was embarrassed to have her teaching us.
Right. And in what year or how old were you when the family moved to Kentucky?
I was 10.
10. And as a young person, what were some of your interests and activities in Pewee Valley?
Well, I was a pretty bookish kid, but we played a lot of softball. And we had a sort of a farm. It was a 5-acre plot of land, which was, it was right in the middle of Pewee Valley, so eventually it was all subdivided. But we had cows and ducks and a goat for a while, and it was a fair bit of work, especially mowing the yard, which was all of 3.5 acres.
Yeah. Did you all have a big kitchen garden as well?
Oh yeah, huge. It was almost an acre of garden.
Mm-hmm.
Mother canned stuff, and it was a big production.
Had either or both of your parents grown up in agricultural households?
My mother did. She was raised on a farm. My father had relatives who had a farm. In fact, one of his uncles, who married late in life, was going to leave his farm to my father, which, if that had happened, I wouldn't have been born.
Mm-hmm.
But he died a month before his wife did, so the wife's estate got the property.
Mm-hmm. But as a youth, your father had spent
Yes,
a fair amount of time
he always
there.
spent his summers on the farm. Yeah, he really loved the rural life, and he was ill-disposed to cities.
And you and your siblings, it sounds like, had a lot of responsibility for the labor of running your farm.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, we had to do a lot of chores.
Did you have primary areas of responsibility, or an area that you were more interested in?
Well, we had to take care of the animals, and I always mowed the yard. We had a Gravely tractor riding mower, so I spent many hours on it.
And you said that you were a bookish child.
Yes.
Were there certain areas that you read in, or authors that you followed particularly?
Yeah, I read Tolstoy and Thomas Mann, Hemingway. I read a lot.
Yeah. How early were you exposed to and reading these great classics?
In high school, I sort of fell into a situation in high school where I took 4 years of Latin, and we had a native-speaking German who had offered 2 years of German, so I took 2 years of German. And I enjoyed it so well that in my senior year, the German teacher arranged for a 3rd year of German just for me.
Oh, wow.
So I by the time I took German at Georgetown too, and by the end of the year I was almost fluent in German, but I lost it all.
And between your childhood and years in college, were there particular events or people that had a great influence on you?
I sort of developed my political opinions entirely on my own, and pretty much in opposition to my father, because I just instinctively felt that his basically right-wing conservative Catholic political opinions were just wrong for me from the beginning. But I read a lot, but there was never any particular mentor as far as politics go.
And were there things sort of in the air or current events that sort of an aha moment for you, or something that you read that?
Well, it was, I guess the biggest aha moment was when the war in Vietnam started. I mean, from the very beginning, I felt very strongly that it was a huge mistake and basically a lie that our government was telling us. Unconscionable. But I mean, I never really demonstrated or anything, expressed it publicly until around 1970.
Yeah, because what was the climate like in Louisville? Around issues of the war, and also I'd be curious, with you beginning, I guess you're at the University of Louisville probably like 61, in terms of race relations and the civil rights movement.
Oh, that was integration was a big issue, and I had a lot of classmates who were extremely racist and expressed it openly. I mean, it didn't shock me. I'd grown up in Kentucky, mostly, and there was a lot of that. But it was not something that affected me personally, and I didn't really grasp the gross injustice of it until a lot later, unfortunately.
Was St. Aloysius segregated?
Or
an all-white school?
No, it was never segregated. I'm not sure when that started, but when I was there, it was integrated. We had very few black children, just a few.
And was Pee-wee Valley, though, pretty segregated?
Well, in terms of geography, yes, or definitely. There was a black area, and there were no blacks living in the white part of town.
And how much sort of interaction did you have as a youth with different races?
Some. The caretaker at the school was an elderly black man and his wife. So we interacted with them a lot. They were very nice people. But they sort of they sort of were stereotypical of the blacks who would take care of the mansion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah. And you you mentioned also that while at the University of Louisville, that you majored in economics and developed an interest in photography. How did you come to find this interest in photography?
Well, I guess it always been, you know, I had a brownie and developed pictures when I was a kid. I always had an interest in it. It just sort of blossomed when I took a photography course and learned all about Ansel Adams and the serious photographers.
And you said you had some shows. What was the subject matter you were?
I spent a lot of time in the Red River Gorge area of Kentucky, photographing nature photography, and that was the subject of them.
But you also did freelance work.
Yes, for the Courier Journal and New York Times, and did one assignment for the National Enquirer.
And what were the sort of things that they were hiring you to shoot?
Well, the National Enquirer was the only female bricklayer in the Union. It was quite strange. But as far as the Courier Journal and the New York Times goes, it was strip mining Appalachian stories.
And was it Ford Motor Company you were with? And was that plant unionized?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It was a automobile assembly plant.
Mm-hmm.
Very large.
And were you a member? Was it?
No. I was a salaried employee. I did inventory control, planning.
Were there any labor struggles at the plant during your time there?
We had one strike. It didn't last long.
Mm.
But there was no, you know, it was a very, very peaceful, you know, in terms of labor relations. Ford, by that time, had learned their lesson.
Mm. So the outcome of the strike was there was like a mediation. And...
It was a national strike.
Okay.
I forget which year it was, but the whole auto industry went on strike.
Mm.
I think it must have been 66 or 7, sometime around that time frame.
And was it at the university that you met Teddy, who would become your wife?
No, it was at the Louisville Free Press. I was dating a friend of hers, and that's how we met.
And her friend was also involved with the Free Press?
No.
No. They were. What were you doing with that paper?
I contributed photographs, the same as the Great Speckled Bird.
And what do you recall some of the things that you were photographing for them?
Oh, demonstrations and that's mostly what I remember. There was a lot of picketing and arrests.
Mm-hmm. mainly around anti-war demonstrations? And were they primarily or exclusively in Louisville, or were you traveling?
Yeah, no, it was just Louisville.
What was the climate like in Louisville in terms of that? Was there a pretty large?
It was depressing, is what I remember about it. You know, the war going on and the police hostility to the press was pretty blatant. It was depressing. And the paper struggled to keep it together, and it was never really successful and finally folded.
Did it fold before you all moved to Atlanta?
We moved to Atlanta when it folded.
Okay.
Yeah, Teddy got in touch with the Great Speckled Bird, and they were open to her coming on staff, which she did.
Were you subscribers to the Bird in Kentucky?
Oh yeah, all of the underground newspapers, you know, had free subscriptions to each other, so we read several of them, and of course there was the Underground Press Association passed around articles, so we were well aware of what was going on in Atlanta. And it seemed like a bigger city, more likely to survive, and for a while it did.
What did your parents think of your involvement with this, and also of your relationship with Teddy?
Yeah, they did not approve, but eventually, after we had children, they got used to it.
Was your mother as sort of outspoken as your dad?
No, she just wanted to make peace, the way most mothers do. She was not ideological at all. But my sister grew up feeling the same way that I did. But my younger brother sort of identified with our dad, and he got sent to Vietnam, and it was never the same. They tried to draft me very early in the war, in the 60s, but I was right relieved to find that psoriasis makes you unfit to serve in this man's army. Of course, later they were taking anybody.
Yeah. That's very interesting that you mentioned psoriasis. I guess gave you a medical exemption. I interviewed somebody else, I think it was Mike Raffoff, and he had mentioned that he was also in Kentucky and working in a tobacco factory, and just all of the, I guess, chemicals and just the plant, the tobacco plant itself, and all the dirt and everything had really irritated his skin. So when he went in for his for his physical, they looked at him and said, "What is wrong with you?" And didn't take him. Yeah.
Yeah, I've done some work around tobacco, and it's unpleasant. When you're harvesting it, it's sticky, and when it's drying out, it's dusty.
Mm-hmm. When were you working?
Summers in Kentucky, I did some work on farms as well. Did not enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like, what was that? Robert Frost poem about the old farmhand who was talking about the first day he ever bucked hay. he said, "Damn, I'd hate to do that all my life, and damned if it isn't what I did."
Mm. And what branch of the service was your brother in?
He was in infantry.
In the Army.
Right out of college, he was drafted and saw a lot of combat. He was exposed to chemicals that eventually killed him. And he was bitter about it and had a right to be.
Mm-hmm. How did your parents sort of take that in? Like, it sounds like it was very visible that he was traumatized.
They both died before he did.
Mm-hmm.
He just died 6 or 7 years ago.
But could they see when he was overseas and then returned?
Oh yeah, it was obvious. He drank a lot and he lost his job at the post office and eventually went on disability, and it was a sad case.
Mm-hmm.
But his daughter went into the National Guard and served in Guantanamo.
So when you and Teddy decide to move to Atlanta, had you all visited Atlanta before?
Never.
Never.
First time.
What did you imagine it was going to be like?
Well, the first day we came, it was in December, and it snowed. It was a good half inch of accumulated snow the morning that we got here. So nobody was on the road. I was the only one driving. And we showed up at the bird office, and nobody wanted to drive, so I drove people around. That was an experience.
Where was the office in 1970?
It was on, I can't remember the name of the street. It was the office that was burned.
Okay.
And, but I can't remember the name of the street. It was a short street.
Yeah,
off
Westminster?
I think that may have been the name of it.
Yeah.
It was off Piedmont.
Mm-hmm. Right on the backside of the park, or?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So what were your impressions of Atlanta when you got here? I would guess that it was a bigger city than Louisville.
Yeah, much bigger. Well, we got settled in, and eventually we wound up sharing a house with Chet Briggs and Karen Lane, and lived there for several years before they bought a house. So yeah, we were settled in fairly quickly and stably.
Where was the house that you all shared?
It was close to the bird offices. It was off a residential street off Piedmont.
Okay.
Damn, I'm getting Alzheimer's, I guess. I can't remember the names of those streets. But yeah, Teddy settled into work, and I got a job, and worked part-time at photography.
Where was your job?
I had several jobs. Worked at an auto parts warehouse for a while, and eventually Tom Coffin, Jack White, and I got into the trucking business for a while.
Oh, you were part of
Trucking
that.
too.
Yeah.
And after that, I got a job with Fulton County selling food stamps, which was a really strange job. You're busy as hell for 3 days of the month, and then the rest you sit around. So I thought, what the hell? I went to enrolled at Georgia State in graduate school, and I studied most of the month. So I was able to get through graduate school fairly quickly.
And what year would you have started with Fulton County, do you think?
It must have been 74, possibly, yeah, 74.
And you said that your job was to sell food stamps?
Yes, at the time, everyone who was on food stamps had to go into the office to buy them. They had to pay, a few dollars, and they got a whole bunch of food stamps. So it was a small office. We had 3 or 4 cashiers, and during the first 3 days of the month, everyone would come in, so everybody would be very busy, and then after that, it was just a trickle. So there were 3 or 4 of us sitting in the office reading.
Right.
It was very strange.
Mm-hmm.
But it got me through graduate school. So then by that time, after the Bird had folded, Teddy, after I got out of school, Teddy wanted to go to nursing school, so she did that, and I got a job with the Atlanta Board of Education after I got my master's degree. And I worked on software development there for a few years, and then got a job with American Software developing computer software, and that's what I did the rest of my life. Fell in with bad company.
So to go back when you first moved to Atlanta, and you all came with the specific purpose of getting involved with the Bird, how would you describe the mood here? You had mentioned that in Louisville, your take on it was really depressing.
Yes, of course, the Louisville Free Press was just barely hanging on, but the Great Speckled Bird seemed much more organized and much more competent. I was impressed. So yeah, the atmosphere was much more optimistic and can do. But I mean, the politics were depressing. I mean, that was the time of the Cambodian invasion and just frightful things going on. But you had a feeling that there was some resistance that you felt good being a part of.
Mm-hmm. And what did you think of the city itself as a place to be living, and the sort of people that you would encounter out and about?
I enjoyed it. I liked Atlanta from the start. Um, we went to baseball games and rooted for the Braves. Don't anymore, not since they moved to Gwinnett County.
Mm-hmm.
Given up on them. But I like Atlanta. I like the people I went to school with and later worked with. It's a good place to live, I think.
Mm. So with the bird and your role doing photography, but also being, I would assume, being pretty closely involved since Teddy was on staff, did you attend the collective meetings, the weekly meetings?
Seldom. I'm not a meeting kind of person.
uh, do you recall sort of what the tenor of the meetings were like, or how the collective worked together?
Well, there were tensions. Especially when the October League was organizing, and there were some serious political disagreements that I just shied away from because I had no interest in them. But Teddy did, so I had to put up with it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So how did the sort of day-to-day involvement for you work? Would you just instinctively take your camera to things that you found interesting?
Well, no,
or get assignments?
I got assignments, and I put together the dark room, and I processed film and things like that.
Your own film as well as others?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Most of the photographers did their own, but occasionally, I had the dark room there, and sometimes other people used it. Yeah, that dark room lasted for 3 years, I think.
And is that at the space on Westminster?
I think that's where I initially developed it, but it may have been in the next headquarters by the time I actually got around to putting together a dark room.
And where did the offices move from there?
It was Juniper Street, I think.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And did the earnings from the paper, the budget of the paper, paid for everything that you needed for the dark room?
Oh, no, I had to scrounge it myself.
Okay.
But, there was some stuff there, but no one had used it in quite a while, and I put it back together again and got some more equipment. Of course, I had some of my own, too.
Mm-hmm.
So some was mine.
Who did you work closely with?
Writers, whoever was writing a story that I was going to take pictures for. And then I, just turned in arty stuff, what we called arty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of that.
Can you talk about about the working relationship between a photographer and a writer, of how you would coordinate things, or?
Well, I mean, some stories you just go out with them and you'd be there, together. But there was never this, I want a picture of that kind of stuff. I mean, you're always on your own, like it would be in any respectable publication.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you'd talk about what you're trying to show, but pretty much it was whatever came up mostly.
And for the more arty stuff, how did that sort of work?
Well, it was just, different photographers considered different things arty, so there was quite a range. But there was, serious political stuff and, street scenes and hippies doing their thing, lots of that. Kids smoking dope.
Yeah. And would you just shoot sort of where your interest took you and submit dozens of photos that they might consider?
There was no submitting. There was no art director. They were pretty grateful for anything you could bring in. I can't recall anything ever being rejected for being politically incorrect, or unlike the articles, some of those were.
In what sense would they reject something?
Oh gosh, I nothing as far as a photograph, but I do remember some arguments about articles, especially during the political phase, serious political arguments.
The October League Marxist-Leninists, not towing the line. Do you know, I had heard, maybe it was in talking to Tom or Stephanie, and I think they were talking about the early years that that various artists would submit artwork, and I guess they kept files of potential materials, and so when they were doing layout, they could go into the files and select. Did you do the same of turning in just lots of photos that they could choose from, or was it more piecemeal?
There were. I didn't contribute that much, so my recollection is that whenever I had something to bring in, it was fine. They would find a place for it. But I don't remember much stock photographs. Now, they did get stock photographs off the press service, but local stock photographs, I can't remember any being around. Art, yeah, they had a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. Did any of the coverage that you were doing require you to travel?
A couple times. We went to Florida once to do a piece on migrant farm workers. But that's the only travel that I can remember. Other people may have done some, but mostly we stayed in town. There was no budget.
Yeah. Was there or are there particular stories or photos that are most memorable to you that you participated in?
Oh gosh, I don't remember once interviewing I can't remember why, but we were interviewing the superintendent of prisons for the state of Georgia. And I took some pictures of him being interviewed. But the man was wondering why these hippies are in my office. It was very uncomfortable. Yeah, whose idea was this?
Right.
But no, I really, I just, I'd have to go back and look at some of the issues. I haven't looked at them for quite a while. But
Mhm.
no, I can't remember anything really memorable. I didn't contribute that much, really. Tom Coffin did much more.
Did you ever, or do you recall if you ever had a cover that was a photo?
Oh, yeah. Lots of covers.
Okay.
Yeah, one of them was the migrant farm worker story. Yeah, one of them was when our son Chris was born. He was on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chris, while Teddy was working on the bird, Chris hung around, and he was carried around in a green strap on Teddy's shoulder. They called Chris the Green Bean.
Did that nickname stick for him?
Oh, no, not anymore. As a matter of fact, he's going to get married next month.
Oh, congratulations to him.
For his second time. I hope it works out this time.
Mm-hmm.
We're hoping for the best.
Yeah. Who were the other photographers on staff? Or that
Carter
were-
Tomasi and Tom Coffin were the primary photographers. They contributed quite frequently. There were a few more, but I can't remember. None that contributed at that level.
And did you work closely with them, or was it
No,
more
I
do
mean,
your own thing?
We'd get together and talk, but there was no coordination. It's whoever was available to do real news.
Did Carter have a background in photography as well? Because
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Carter was a serious photographer. He had some shows here, and I believe he's gone on to work as a photographer till now. He's not in town anymore. I think he may be in L.A.
because Tom, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Tom sort of came into photography while he was on the bird.
Right. Yeah, I think Carter was looking for places to get published.
Mm-hmm. Did you serve as, or did you and Carter teach other people some techniques of photography or of developing, processing?
Yeah, I do remember teaching a few people. I can't remember who they were, but no one was seriously interested in developing films. That's hard work.
Yeah.
And risk prone.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall anything about who the neighbors were at the bird offices that you would have hung out with?
No, not really. At the time, it was much more of a transient neighborhood. There were little like boarding houses, and it's been much gentrified since then. But no one complained that I remember. But no one was especially friendly that I can recall.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall how issues like racial politics or the women's movement, gay and lesbian liberation, how those were impacting work at the Bird, coverage, stories?
Well, I mean, of course, there were discussions all the time about priorities. Lots of people felt that their issue wasn't getting adequate attention.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't participate in those discussions. I just heard about them.
Right.
Yeah, I was pretty much a hanger-on, and just there because Teddy was still there. But of course, I was working with Tom at the time, hauling furniture. Yeah, to this day, I can still pack a truck if you're gonna move.
Yeah. Good to know.
There's a lot to it.
Yeah. How much time would you sort of guesstimate that you spent at the Bird in any given week?
Oh, half a day at most. I was working, and as time went on, the time that I spent on photography just gradually eased down. And as I started graduate school, I did hardly any.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm just pretty much a iPhone photographer.
So the birdhouse wasn't necessarily just a hangout, like when you had some spare time, you'd go just chill out with whoever was there? Or...
Somewhat. I mean, because Teddy was still there. I'd hang out some, yeah. But not regularly, no. No, I was pretty much off doing other things by then.
Mm. So by about 74, when you go back to grad school, you're phasing out of how much you're working with the Bird.
Pretty much, yeah.
So for those 4 years where you were pretty involved, who were the folks that you had sort of closest relationships with? It sounds like you and Tom spent a lot of time together.
Yeah, we did. Gene Guerrero and Pam Beardsley and I guess I wasn't real close with most of the other folks. Bob Goodman and Susie. I guess those are the closest.
Yeah, because when you move out of the house that you were sharing
Mhm.
off of Piedmont, and correct me again, but you and Teddy moved to Grant Park? Is that?
No, we rented a house on Piedmont for a couple of years before we bought our house. And that's when we moved to Ormond Park.
Ormwood, okay.
When we bought our house there. And then after Teddy's mother got sick and had to come live with us, we bought a larger house, also in Ormwood Park, just a block away. So we've been there for almost 36, 37 years.
But, and over in that neighborhood, I think I remember Teddy telling me that y'all were in close proximity to,
Yeah,
like, to Nan.
Bob and Susie and Nan.
Yeah. And that the kids went to schools
Oh,
together.
oh yeah. Yeah, we were the terror of the PTA.
Talk about that a little.
Well, they had some teachers at Annie West that were, old school Southern white ladies. And like my daughter, her name is Megan Jessica. And when she got into the first grade, the teacher said, "You have to go by your first name." So she insisted on calling her Megan instead of Jessica.
Mm.
So, I mean, all of us had to keep went to all the PTA meetings and really kept a close eye on the teachers and made sure the kids they all got into advanced placement, and we worked at it, and they were happy with the education they got.
And is that sort of the mid to late 70s when you guys would have been, when the kids would have been in elementary?
Yeah, and early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
They both finished at Annie West. And they got into the middle school, the name of it escapes me, close to Grady, and then they both went to Grady High School.
Is that Inman Middle over there?
I don't think so. About it.
Yeah.
The name escapes me.
So when was your son born? What year?
In 1972.
Okay. So just a couple years after you guys had arrived.
1 year. We got here in 71. And then Jessica was born in 76. Centennial baby.
Yeah. So in the free time that you all might have had, what sort of things did you all do for fun? You had mentioned going to Braves games. Were there other activities that you guys?
Oh gosh. Well, I played a lot of tennis, Alta, and we really enjoyed going to the beach once for a week every summer.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as family recreation, we didn't have much time for it. Teddy was working and I was working, and
Mm-hmm.
kids were going to school, and we were busy.
Yeah, yeah. So you were involved when the bird offices were firebombed.
Yes.
Um,
I think there was some suspicion the city of Atlanta government may have had something to do with it.
Right.
I don't think it was ever corroborated.
What was your sort of response or feeling when that happened?
Well, I mean, I was shocked. It was, you know, you read about that happening in the South, but I wasn't quite ready for it. But, I mean, there was never any doubt we were going to pick up and keep publishing. I don't think we missed an issue.
Mm-mm.
You know, what can you do?
Yeah. What do you recall what was lost, or maybe what a better way to phrase is what was able to be salvaged?
There was some stuff salvaged. I think the layout material. Somehow, I don't recall the damages being that serious.
Mhm.
Just the shock of it.
So you were probably able to salvage some of the darkroom materials and.
I don't remember, but I must have been because we kept developing film.
Right, right. Did you get involved with any other sort of groups or organizations, causes during those years?
No.
Or thereafter?
No, I didn't. I've just been sort of disappointed in political action and the results it's been capable of pulling off. I mean, I'm a normal Democrat and have never been tempted to become a conservative in any way, but I sort of feel demonstrated out.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe Trump will change that. Who knows? I'm thinking about putting on my demonstrating shoes again.
Mm-hmm. There are increasingly a lot of opportunities.
Yeah.
So you got a master's degree in statistics from here at Georgia State, and ultimately ended up after the Board of Education.
In software development.
Yeah.
That's what I've always done.
And what would you do? What was your sort of role in the development of software?
Well, I started off programming, and then eventually got into systems design and the whole development process of design, build, and test for banking software, credit card processing software.
Okay.
And then Equifax bought the company I worked for. So I worked there for several years and then did consulting for a few years before I retired.
And in your schooling, had you taken classes or been taught
Oh, yeah.
about programming?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I just had a few courses in it, but I learned it quickly. The way I used to learn languages, German and Latin and French, so I picked it up very, very quickly.
Mm.
I started off in programming mainframes and eventually got into web systems and online programming.
So you have learned a lot of different languages.
Kept learning, yeah.
Yeah. Was that work stimulating and exciting for you?
I enjoyed it. And towards the end, I got focused on international systems and spent several years mostly overseas. So I've been to every continent except Antarctica.
Oh, wow.
I enjoyed traveling a lot.
Where all did you get sent to?
Europe, North Africa, Morocco, Turkey, Greece, Italy, Hong Kong, Australia, India, England, spent a lot of time in England, Latin America, Peru, Venezuela. Where else? That may be it.
Yeah, that's a lot of travel. Did you ever get to take your family with you?
A couple times. Teddy got to go to the Great Barrier Reef and to Spain.
Okay. You didn't take her back to Greece?
We wanted to, but never got to it.
Yeah. And this was all working on banking and financial systems. Did your work on the bird and involvement in these politics, in what ways did that impact your later life?
Oh, I'm not sure that it did really. It was, I look back on it as very interesting and an insight into what was really an earthquake in American culture. And I'm grateful for that insight, but I really haven't continued it, and I don't have any more insights. I have no idea what's going on in pop culture now. Can't keep up with it.
You might be better off for it. And from the present, from the perspective of the present, what are some of the ideas or ideals that matter most?
Well, I mean, to me, the biggest challenge facing our culture is the rise of economic inequality. I mean, it's just staggering, the increase in billionaires and the massive wealth that they have. And I just despair of any way to reverse that. It just seems to me it's a snowball rolling downhill, and it's only going to get worse. I mean, it's depressing, again.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And you mentioned earlier on the annual get-togethers of the bird. Have you maintained relationships, friendships with folks from those years?
Not really. We very seldom get together other than the annual get together, but it's lots of members of my family that I see less than once a year.
Right. Well, I think we've covered most of the ground that I had. Are there some other ideas?
I'm afraid I really didn't contribute much to the bird, but as I say, I did enjoy it, and it was a real insight to me and things that happened. I was happy to have been there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you coming in and taking the time to tell us about this.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you.